Welcome. I'm David Barlow, and in this presentation I shall explain how one can innocently order $99 worth of powdered cactus online, only to be subjected to a dawn raid and then be charged with importing £22,000 worth of Class A drugs into the UK. This is only possible because we have corrupt police and customs officers, corrupt politicians and a corrupt judiciary. Thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money is wasted on every case, all with the support of the controlled media, who dutifully regurgitate the official line. So, first of all, what is a Class A drug? This is something we are never told, but the mere mention of the phrase in a newspaper report can be enough to end one's career prospects and be regarded as a pariah in one's own neighbourhood. Sloppy journalists are happy to use the phrase, which evokes images of a mythical bogeyman peddling their wares at the school gate. Never do they question the meaning of the phrase, but in reality, beyond its nebulous legal definition, it has no meaning whatever. It is a flexible definition that can be adjusted as required. And in our ever-expanding law and order industry, the category grows ever larger. So, whilst having a particular cactus on your windowsill is not yet against the law, were you to slice it up on a breadboard, it can then be considered a preparation of mescaline by the customs comedians, giving them the legal power to thieve anything they care to from your home whilst they hold you prisoner in a windowless cell without even a wash basin. And if you did intend to consume it or make an extraction from it, why on earth shouldn't you? What exactly is so dangerous about this substance long venerated by the American Indian? It is simply an abuse of state power, and along with all the other abuses, justifies the employment of unproductive parasites within the police, customs, probation, prisons and judiciary, not to mention lawyers, and contributes to our huge public sector deficit. You may ask what evidence I have to show that these agencies are corrupt. If you care to examine document MG5 on my Customs Rogues webpage, you will see that the $99 of powdered cactus has now become plant material in which mescaline was detected and is given a street valuation of up to £13,000 by the expert evidence department of the Serious Organised Crime Agency. These characters. So you might say, I could make a Freedom of Information request to ascertain how this figure was arrived at. Well, you could in a free society, but our politicians have exempted these crooks from the Freedom of Information Act. Not content with one whopper, they went on to value 30 grams of Anadyranthina colubrina seeds at up to £450. On page 8, the Forensic Science Service report quoted the website written on the seed packet, and a quick search on this site would show the cost of 25 grams of these seeds as a mere £9.95, and perfectly legal too. They also took 4.5 grams of dried mushrooms from my freezer, which, after being sent to London by Securicor for forensic analysis, turned into 4.63 grams of psilocin. I did say they were crooks. The Forensic Science Service report by Louise Matthews, who modestly proclaims, "I am an expert in the field of forensic science," never mentions cactus once. This is forensic fraud. Another crook is Dover Customs Officer Sarah Wilson, who inflates the upper value of the cacti to over £22,000 in her witness statement. She also lies on two other counts. Firstly, in describing powdered cactus as mescaline when it clearly isn't, and secondly, by claiming that it is in a refined form when it clearly isn't, Powdering a dried cactus does not refine it. And how were these rogues able to invade my home? Because another crook, Andrea Scott of Dover Customs, gave false evidence to a magistrate to obtain a search warrant, which also illustrates how corrupt our judiciary are. They will accept any bullshit from police or customs without one jot of evidence. My computer, my entire spore collection, and 20 books and magazines were thieved, all of which are legal. This is Dover Customs crook Mark Bryce, explaining why he has stolen my belongings.
Looking at the, in relation to your other things,
yes,
I mean,
personal property, yes.
Yeah, you say it's personal property, but in relation to the offence for which you've been charged, okay, if we look at the notebook and the magazines in their own, obviously in their own right, that's the reason that they were seized at the time is because of the reason that you were arrested for in relation to drugs importation. I know it's known as
cactus, ordering cactus.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
The problem is obviously being a controlled drug. I know there's obviously their own. Your
there's a question mark over that.
Okay, I'll fully appreciate that. But obviously the material that we've got, including the scales that were taken at the time, were in relation to drugs and drugs paraphernalia.
I don't think reading books is against law in a free country, is it? I don't think having a book in your library...
Not saying it is.
To raid my library isn't really acceptable, is it, in a democracy?
Well, it's not a raid, is it?
It was a raid. It was a raid.
I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that
okay.
Over the phone with Mr. Barlow. I'll need to speak to the case, because I'm not actually the case officer for it,
right.
but I need to speak to the case officer.
Who is the case officer?
It's Sarah Wilson is the case officer. Here.
Right. I'm just requesting those three items.
Sorry. What I also need to be careful of now, Mr. Barlow, is that everything then, in theory, should go through your solicitors. Okay. And
the books will be sent to him?
No. Oh. The books I can quite sure we'll be holding on to until the time of the trial, as we will with the notebook.
Okay.
For the seized under Section 19 of PACE.
Under Section 19 of PACE, he can seize anything which he finds on the premises if he has reasonable grounds for believing that it is evidence in relation to an offence which he is investigating or any other offence. Exactly what evidential value they had was never explained to me. I eventually recovered my computer after 6 months and my books and magazines after 8 months. My spore collection was never returned. All that remains are my microscope slides. Customs, now rebranded as the UK Border Agency, are specialists at car thefts and burglaries. While they appear to enjoy some legal immunity, in reality they are totally above the law. The judiciary nearly always find in their favour, and they have an endless supply of taxpayers' money to spend on barristers, so they can appeal any decision they lose until they bankrupt the appellant. The official euphemism used by Customs for thefts is seizure. In theory, one can contest this in court, but it would be very unwise to do so, since the scales of justice are weighted heavily in their favour. HMRC reference Notice 12A states that if the court finds in their favour, which it usually does, Customs can apply costs, starting at £1,500. So those crooks in Westminster have rigged the system so far in their favour that the public doesn't stand a cat in hell's chance. You can visit the Customs Circus every Thursday at Dover Magistrates Court. And they do not confine their criminal activities to cactus buyers. An innocent booze cruise mother weeps as van is sold by Customs tells the story of Mrs. Kim Cundall, a mother of 4, who had her Mercedes van seized by Customs officers in Dover and sold at auction, simply because they considered that she had purchased too much wine and beer in France for her 40th birthday party. She was never charged with any offence and received not a penny from the auction of her van, which she used for her business. Now, I did also mention the controlled media. Here we have 2 BBC stories. Police seize hallucinogenic drugs from Edinburgh flat, and we are told hallucinogenic drugs with a street value of £35,000 have been seized from a flat in Edinburgh. officers recovered 3.5 kilos of mescaline from an address in Nicholson Street on Thursday. We are shown a staged police photo showing the mescaline and the packaging with the identifying label placed face down. In another raid in Newcastle, we are told officers seized £20,000 worth of mescaline and arrested a 76-year-old man. Have they no shame? Fortunately, I was able to obtain a photo of the package face up with the label showing the contents as cacti powder, Echinopsis peruviana. The supplier's name, address, phone number and website is clearly marked, and a search online would reveal the cost as a mere $99 for 900 grams. So I wrote to the BBC with a photograph of the packet, quoting the website, but was advised by Lucia Fortusi of BBC Complaints, these reports are based on information passed by the police and BBC News is satisfied that the information is perfectly accurate. I made further inquiries and was told by Claire Jordan. They replied that these reports are based on information passed by the police and BBC News is satisfied that this information is perfectly accurate. Again from Carrie-Anne MacDonald. I have discussed your complaint with those responsible for managing content on the BBC website, and as previously stated, the content of both articles are based on information passed by the police authority. Furthermore, they confirm also the photo as seen in both articles was supplied by the police and is of Mescaline, she says. They have nothing more to add on this matter. And another freeloader, Richard Hutt, Complaints Director. I spoke to Northumbria Police, who confirmed that the image in the article shows the materials seized in the raid described in the article, and that laboratory tests have confirmed that this substance is mescaline. Considered as a generic illustration of mescaline, I do not believe that the picture would have served to seriously mislead audiences. While the website you have sent details of offers a 900 gram bag of powdered cactus for $99, which I assume to be US dollars, the same page also states we do not ship to Europe. I do not feel able therefore to consider this to be a reliable indication of the likely value of the substance in the UK. Absolute rubbish, as the package shown in the photo is from Compras of Peru. Finally, freeloader Francesca O'Brien, Head of Editorial Standards at the BBC Trust, concluded, "You have not produced any evidence to suggest that mescaline was not seized by the police, but it seems to me that in the context of a news story on arrest for possession and supply of a Class A drug, the difference between mescaline and cactus powder from which it is derived is not significant. I rest my case." Now, the purpose of the BBC Trust, which consists of the great and the good, headed by the former Governor of Hong Kong, Lord Patton, all of whom are on undisclosed salaries, is to ensure that the BBC is independent. May I suggest that it would save a great deal of public money if it was scrapped, since they do nothing of the kind. So, if you are thinking of ordering cacti from Peru, I would encourage you not to. This story has a rather odd postscript, in that I was able to obtain a copy of the photograph of the label from my solicitor. Where the description should be is printed tuna. So I wrote to Customs requesting the return of the packaging to examine the label for any alterations, after I was acquitted on all charges, but was advised by Sarah Wilson that it was seized as part of the initial seizure of controlled drug and therefore will not be returned. I then emailed Compras of Peru and was advised by the proprietor that it was possible that tuna may have been included on the label. Now, I'm not suggesting any collusion here, but it's a very odd thing to do and would instantly arouse the suspicion of the authorities. This cactus business also raises a general question of whether police and customs routinely lie to the courts and the press over so-called drugs. I have to say that in my experience they do. You will see from my LSD webpage that I have closely followed the case of Casey Hardison, a small-time chemist from Brighton who was sentenced to 20 years in 2005. According to the Brighton Argus, a specialist team of detectives and scientists spent 2 days searching his house and found nothing. And yet, 2 days later, police officers returned to the house, which had been left unguarded, to finalise the search, as they put it. On this visit, they miraculously found 145,000 doses of LSD in a cupboard in the hall, wrapped in plastic bags inside a Liverpool Football Club bag. Now, if there was any justice, this would be inadmissible evidence, since they had found nothing after 2 days and then left the house unguarded. Furthermore, the police told the jury that Hardison was capable of making drugs with a street value of up to £5 million. So one might expect his enormous assets to be seized, and they were, but this time it wasn't reported. The final asset recovery figure was a mere £10,000. So in my case, they exaggerated the scale by 300 times, even though it was only cactus, and in Casey's case by 500 times, which was how they justified his astronomical sentence, upheld by the Court of Appeal. Times have changed since 2005, in particular with the introduction of the Bitcoin currency in 2009 and the advent of the anonymous market Silk Road in 2011, which you can find on my LSD webpage. This effectively heralds the end of prohibition as far as the consumer is concerned, as any substance is now only a few mouse clicks away, although the controlled media never mention bitcoins or the Silk Road. So any bullshit from the police or customs about keeping drugs off the streets is exactly that. What is really needed is some form of regulation to keep these things away from juveniles and the vulnerable, and to prevent the addict population from resorting to burglary to support their heroin and cocaine habits. Obviously, organised crime does not want regulation, as it would destroy their businesses. So, if you find yourself on a jury, you might ask who the career criminals really are, and whether they have a vested interest in preserving the black market. And if so, you might consider the not guilty option, as is your right, regardless of the evidence. It might just start a trend. Most people do not realise that our courts are shrouded in secrecy. The only person allowed to make a record of court proceedings is the court reporter. Perhaps you might not feel confident that their record keeping will be impartial and wish to make an audio recording yourself, as 85-year-old war veteran Norman Scarfe did, as he was hard of hearing. For doing so, he was sent to prison under the Contempt of Court Act, which prohibits use of tape recorders in court. By the public, that is. Mr. Scarfe had previously been subjected to an attack in his home by the police. Notice how the courts now boast about digital audio recordings, but only allow you a transcript which they produce. One might reasonably expect the Law Society, which represents solicitors, to campaign on this issue of open justice, but they don't, since ultimately they all feed from the same trough. Another issue that the Law Society ignores is the so-called Enhanced Criminal Records Bureau check, which I would have to consent to if I were to apply for another teaching position. This would reveal all charges to a prospective employer and most likely disqualify me. So I am effectively guilty even though I have committed no crime. Finally, please spare a thought for Leonard Pickard and Clive Apperson, American LSD makers who were arrested in 2000. Leonard Pickard will never be released, whilst Clyde Apperson, who has no previous convictions, must serve 30 years until he is 75. Some democracy. Thanks for watching.